All right. Thank you for being here. Rick DellaRatta, musician, enterpriser, voice for peace. When did you become aware of this thing humans call creativity?
I would have to say that, I sensed it because creativity is all around you, especially when you're a child. It's innate. It's a part of you. It just comes out of you, and it comes out of the other children and the other people. So you notice it. But I started to see as I was growing up that they were they were kind of designating things as creative. And I started to see that a lot of that was oriented towards the arts or culture or anything that you create, whether it could be an invention or things like that. So that's kind of how I started to gear towards, this word creativity looks interesting. It looks like people are doing, very positive things in that world.
Where do you find that creativity originates for you?
Well, if really what I'm finding out now is that creativity is kind of related to raising your frequency. And partially because I've been on so many podcasts as a guest that I now have the Jazz for Peace podcast. And a lot of those guests that apply are healers and stuff. And they're all variant, but they talk about the same thing, which is raising your frequency. And they have different, they're all unique and different, but ultimately they're talking about the same thing. And so I do find that creativity is somehow related to raising one's frequency, and that is a apparently a really good thing to have in your bag of toys or whatever for getting through life.
Where do you think that creativity comes from? Like, do you think it's something you manifest through your own actions or experience, or do you think it's from outside of you?
I think very likely it is a connection between all forms of life and the universe. So, I mean, if you look at a bird, you might see creativity. You might see the bird doing something creative, or you might see any kind of a living organism. So, I think when we somehow connect and get in tune with whatever this world is, this grand creation of how we of many unknowns, creativity manifests itself. It becomes like second nature. It realizes itself. It appears. It becomes.
Hmm. How do you see creativity in music, whether it's the words or the sound of it? How do you
A
how
lot
would
of
you explain
create
that to someone?
Sure, a lot of creativity is related in some form or other to composition. So, if you're a songwriter, you're writing something. If you're a composer, you're composing something. But if you're a player, you're also improvising something. And even when you improvise, it is somehow related to the actual composition of the piece. So it kind of is what the manifestation of something is often a creative form in one way or the other. And that creativity often contributes to to the whole. It's a major part of whether it's the actual creation and then you're just regurgitating the same thing, or it's something that was created and then is uniquely expressed each time it's performed.
Okay. With poetry and music, how do you see those two interacting? Poetry just being, I guess, with more words with more, and then music added. How do you see those different
Oh,
and the same?
well, poetry and music first interacted with me personally on the morning of 9/11 because I had told you off camera I was living less than a quarter of a mile from the World Trade Center down in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and I was tipped off by a photographer who was working on Wall Street, and she called me and said, "Hey, something's going on up there." And I said, "Let me just take a look." And I went up on my roof, my fifth floor. I was on the fifth floor walk up, and so I was living on the fifth floor, and I just walked up on the roof in 2 seconds and witnessed everything, not realizing that I was maybe one of few people in the entire world that was witnessing something live like that as it took place. And so words came out of me, not necessarily music, but actual words. So I wrote the words down, and now I had a poem. And so what I often do in performances is I basically will just accompany those words. I'll recite the words and accompany them to any kind of a free improvisation. And in doing so, I'm matching words and music every single time, and differently in a unique way for that moment in time.
When you improvise music, where are you doing scales, or are you tapping into like just the feeling of the moment? How do you do that?
Yes, I'm tapping into a feel of the moment, and I'm not using anything on purpose. So in other words, I'm not thinking. In other words, the idea of creativity is something that flows. If I think about it, I'm actually blocking the creative process. So that's why I was telling you earlier, it must be some kind of a connection between, us living organisms and the universe, because the scales are something maybe you'll do in practice, but then when you actually do something creative, especially if it's improvisational, you're basically allowing whatever flows through you to happen. So you're not really doing anything on purpose per se.
How much time do you spend normally writing music or composing?
Well, I would say that, most of my day is involved one way or another in creativity and the music process, because um, a long time ago, I remembered a girlfriend of mine who had taken a lesson with kind of a really high up the food chain, kind of a jazz aficionado at that time that I knew of. And she had told me that he practiced a lot in his head, and that kind of influenced me, that musician had done that. So I feel like I'm doing things in my head. I don't have to be at the piano all the time to do things. And I will often be in a creative situation in the most boring of situations will enable me to be the most creative. So let's say I'm in a taxi or something, not that I'm in taxis a lot, but or a car, it's just something boring, a red light, I'm stuck somewhere and I can't really do anything except wait for something. Um, that's an opportunity for me to actually tap into something creative, and I can actually visualize music or a concept or whatever. But I really allow it to happen. I just allow the door open for creativity to come in any form or any way, however it wants to.
Do you think about music in tones or more in notes? Since you know notes, do you think, well, that's a A and a B, or this is a sharp or whatever? Do you hear those just things that occur in nature when you're just, whether you're walking through the street and it's naturally occurring from car sounds or whatever, or somewhere where there's not the technological sounds, but just natural sounds? How do
Well, I
you
will.
visualize that music?
Yeah. So it's kind of twofold. In other words, I'm definitely aware of musical situations just from being a musician. For example, I remember one time I had a concert in the south of India, and I showed up there, and the people said, what do you think of the country so far? I'd only been there for a couple hours, maybe a few minutes even. I said, the people who came to pick me up at the airport, actually, and I said, I just can't believe all the wild sounds. What is going on? I never heard anything like this before. And it turned out what it was the horns, a car horn, had no standardization in maybe the country of India, but definitely that area of southern India, you could do anything you wanted with your car horn. So everybody had these wacky sounds for their car horn. They had what they wanted their car horn to sound like. And some car horns would have as many as 15 tones. So I was picking up on all of the musical. I was hearing it musically being a musician, which is a lot different maybe than somebody else who might just be hearing a crazy sound. And I'm hearing the amount of tones, the pitches of the tones, all that stuff. But on the other hand, sometimes I'm visualizing a concept and not specifically the notes. And other times I literally am visualizing it from a keyboard and really thinking in terms of the actual notes, just because of my knowledge of what that would be. Other times I'm hearing something, not knowing the notes, but I'm like, I want to gravitate towards that which I'm hearing. So it's twofold.
Oftentimes because I would say I'm more of a writer than anything else, that you get these ideas of what a character says or a way to explain something, or whether it's poetry or prose, and then you write that down. So at any moment you can put it down in your notes in a notebook, in your phone. If you're at the computer, then you type it out. Then however you record it, you have it down for later. Do you do that same type of thing with music, to where you think, oh, well, this is a good sound, like a da 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 da, and you're like, I got to remember that, and you have to record it somehow, whether it's a voice recording of the sound or writing out. I guess I would write out what it sounds like just in words, but if I knew the notes, I'd probably write the notes, or what it roughly sounded like. How do you keep track of those ideas when they come to you throughout the day?
Sometimes I do lose a lot of melodies and a lot of sounds just because I'm in no position or no place where I can document it. There's something going on. I'm in the middle of something, and I'm not able to. But I do, when exactly what you're talking about, when I get a chance or when I have the ability to. I remember one time I was sitting at the piano as a teenager, and I had a gig, and just before the gig, a melody came, and the melody, I quickly wrote it down. Otherwise, I would have lost it. And then I was able to play it on that, at that place I was going to play at. And then that melody, I think it was in maybe first year of college. And then someone at my college, I played it for them, and they said, "What do you think this sounds like?" And that person gave it a name called "Falling Away." And that song, I remember, performing it once in Africa and having people say it was one of their favorite pieces of the show. And this was something that, again, had just come to me completely in full in a moment. And if I hadn't have written it down, it would have been lost.
How often do you play the piano? Like, you do it daily? Are there days you don't do it?
Well, I do it daily unless it is simply not feasible, but if I'm in, if I'm able to, I will do something at the piano daily, because there's always something to do. There could be a little piece of a song that I'm getting ready to perform that I don't remember because I haven't played it in so many years, and I have to go over it. Just little things like that. It could be anything.
Do you ever have times where you have built up in your notes a bunch of different melodies, and then you have to arrange them a certain way, whether they're all part of the same thing or they're all their own thing? And if you do, how do you organize those thoughts?
Well, I have to do it both musically now and visually, because I sometimes, do things where I edit, my own shows or whatever, or my own things where I started doing it when I was traveling to exotic places where it was, Nepal or something. And who's going to believe what I'm seeing if I don't take some of these things and put them together? So just the same way that you would, kind of paste music together, you could also do it with video, and then you could also do it with underlining it with music and all of that stuff. I basically will do it similar to what I think is constructive practice. So if I'm practicing, there will be a moment where something like your head is too filled up with data and you can't really progress because everything's full. It's almost like you're locked. And at that point, you have to stop and you just have to let everything kind of flow. You have to refresh. You know what I mean? So I do the same. I mean, since that works in music, I do it in other situations like what you're talking about, where, I get in a situation where, okay, don't push it because that's going to take more energy and probably you're going to get less result. But now you filled up your hard drive or whatever it is in your head. Now, take a break. And then when you feel it's clear again, reassess. And that's when the next movement forward will come. Even if it's in a creative process, you have the better chance of a new creative idea coming from that point, from that freshness, from that kind of empty tank.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The sportscaster Dan Patrick would call it the passion bucket. Your passion bucket gets full, and then you have to. Yeah. Except that they put it in sports references where, if somebody is playing well, it's because they have a lot of passion for it, and their passion bucket's full. Just a party note for that.
Yeah, that's interesting. He's been around a long time, that sportscaster.
Yeah. So music like that sounds a lot like writing as far as how creativity interacts with it or how you interact with creativity. Sometimes I visualize the creativity outside of myself as residing in a place. And I think it's always there. And certainly it could be interacting with other people all the time while it's interacting with me, if I'm ignoring it or not paying attention to it. And I visualize it as sometimes as being in an apartment where creativity is just walking around in their robe, eating ice cream, waiting for me to say, okay, now this is a time I'm trying to do something. I need some help with this, whatever I'm doing, whether it's you're doing some sort of carpentry, you're writing, you're playing music, whatever it is, that you interact with this thing that's outside beyond us. Have you ever personified creativity that way? Or even if it's the first time you're thinking about it now, what do you think that creative essence, that creative spirit is doing when we are not interacting with it?
So I think the time away from creative, you mean when you're just doing something else, and then what is going on with the creativity? What is going on with that energy when you're concentrating on something else? Is that what you mean?
Right.
Okay. I think that is part of the flushing out of the full, you know what I mean? It's part of the rejuvenation process. So in other words, you let's say you're writing a song or you're caught up in something or you're doing so, you're involved and you're in it, you're in the zone. But again, everything's filling up with data. You're getting a melody, you're getting a chord, you're getting you're getting an improvisational concept. You're coming up with something new or whatever it is, or you're getting an idea of how to address a song or whatever it could be. You're filling up. But if you go out and play golf, or maybe for me, might be swimming or skiing or just something social with people. Again, I think that is part of that break that creates a rejuvenation, of which when you return to that song, now you not only have a freshness, but you also have all of a sudden you realize you're able to unblock what was blocked before you took that break.
Oftentimes if I'm writing a story, I'll make a unofficial soundtrack for it. And it's out of just songs I know, things I listen to when I think about that scene that I'm writing, and you can think about it over and over again. Like if you have a song you like and you end up listening to it or playing it 20 or 30 times, that seems excessive. But I think think everybody that's listened to music has probably felt that way before, where they just want to hear that song again. That I can play that scene through my head while I'm listening to it, while I'm either running or swimming or doing something else, that I don't have to think about so much the thing I'm concentrating on physically. Do you find that you have times where you're more open to those thoughts when you're physically active versus just when you just sit down and say, okay, now I'm going to think of a new melody?
Like sometimes if I'm swimming in a swimming pool, there'll be some song. I don't know where it came from. And I can't really get rid of it if I try. So I just let it go and I swim to a song in my head that I can't really explain the rhyme or reason of how. It could have just been I was riding a bike past a car and it came out of the car window. I just don't know. Or it could just be I don't even know how it got there. But I just that's something that happens to me. And then of course there is that situation where you'll hear something and that'll be the flavor of the moment. You'll want to hear that over and over and over again too. So both of those things definitely are in play. As to whether or not they influence my creativity, you know, after that, I guess I don't know. I mean, it could be possible, or it could just be something that comes in and out.
With poetry, have you, the Jazz for Peace poem, have you written other poems since then? Do you do that regularly? Are you practicing poetry, or are you more on the song musical side?
Well, what's interesting is that poetry and lyrics are really not that far away from each other. They're relatively related. So I've, you know, I've kept myself open not only to there's three things that I like to do. Um, one is just poetry, but not necessarily so much a poet, but poetry either in the form of lyrics or in the form of a poignant thought, a thought that just has meaning to me. So I will write down things. I actually have a famous quote that was attributed to me. If you ever write Rick DellaRatta famous quote, and you'll see something that I just happened to say in an interview that got lifted by famous quotes websites. But what I will do often is a thought will come into my head that feels profound to me, at least knowledge that I want to retain, or a thought that I don't want to forget that I thought it. So I'll write that down. So that's kind of, I'm kind of a pseudo poet in that, my poetry is it's like a poem slash lyric poem in the form of lyrics, or poem in the form of random thoughts that I feel are special or worthy of dictating.
Yeah, affirmations, meditations.
Affirmations. Yeah, I
If
like
you're
that.
Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah, who
Well,
was another
what's the famous quote there, Rick? Come on,
the
you can't
famous
put it out there
quote.
and then not tell us.
Sure, thank you. The famous quote is basically when we fill our souls up with what would be our greatest qualities. I mean, as a species, we have all these great qualities. We have a lot of things that aren't so great, but if we fill our souls up with our greatest qualities, just that simple, identify our greatest qualities and fill our soul up with those qualities. So the quote is when we fill our souls up with things like creativity and artistry, intellectuality, humanity, things of that nature, we will have a better chance at avoiding the behavior that leads to destruction. And again, I wish I could say I sat around and thought that out but I just happened to say it off the top of my head, and it happened to get printed in an article, and it was lifted from the article in all these famous quotes websites.
I keep in my phone a folder that is quotes, and it's quotes from TV shows, movies, from just regular conversation. If I'm talking to somebody and they say something, I go, that sounds like a good quote. Then I'll put it down in there with the time and date just for posterity. And there's a show called Justified, which is full of excellent quotes that you could write down and use in common conversation if you ever wanted to. One like when you're in kindergarten, you go to school and you bite a person every day, you tend to become known as a biter. Things like that I think that's worth it. Or when I flew to see my parents when we were on the West Coast, and I said, I flew first class because if you can't get there in first class, you can't get there. And my dad said, "You don't look very first class." I was like, that stings, but it's a good quote. It's a good quote. So I wrote that down.
That's interesting. I think that's great. I think that's a great exercise because when my famous quote came out, I only found out because I would be looking for something on Google. Someone would contact, "Hi, we were thinking of having you come to this city again. Do you have information from your last time you were there?" And I would look on Google and I would see that I was on someone's quote list, their personal famous quote list or whatever. And I would get to see all the other quotes. And I was just amazed, like you mentioned, Marcus Aurelius and those guys, Seneca and all those Stoic guys are amazing. But I didn't even know who Aldous Huxley was at that time, for example. And I would see these quotes and I was like, man, that's amazing. And the other thing interesting is somebody does not have to be profound to say something profound. I mean, there's quotes from people that are, well-known criminals. I mean, there's the most famous rogue cop here in this city said something once that really resonated with me in terms of, what happens to so many people who find themselves on the wrong path. And all he said was, he said, "Everything's fine, then it's not, and it's too late." Yeah, everything is fine, and then it's not, and it's too late. So in other words, with him, because he was a rogue cop, he was flying with all the grift, you know what I mean? So everything was fine. He was getting this, he was getting that. He was, doing all these crazy things, really rogue things with drugs and stuff. And everything was fine. But at the moment that it wasn't fine anymore, it was already too late. So in other words, now it's not fine and he can't fix it. So I thought that was an interesting quote from somebody who is not, someone that is revered in our world.
Yeah, quotes are interesting because they are those little ideas, the snapshots of things, and you can take them out of context. But I also like it because if I'm reading a book, watching a show, whatever, and you hear something that is, to me, poetic and profound, that you go, wow, that somebody really put some time into thinking that, or they tapped into something and it was just the perfect line at the perfect time, that I think that's what kind of peels a layer back of creating things for me, of whether you're writing a book, making a show, whatever. It's the difference between just watching it and then understanding another level of this is the work that went into writing this. And I think I'm not so much of a musician that I know all the things that musicians know, but I would imagine it has to be the same for somebody that knows different scales, different melodies, different ways music works into each other. I've talked to people that have gone to music schools before, majored in music, and I used to think, well, that seems like a weird thing to get a degree in. But then having talked to them, I go, wow, there's a whole bunch of layers of things that I just don't understand. That's why you would go to school to learn those things and think about them. So I think it gives you a deeper appreciation, like a film appreciation class I went to in college. I thought it was just going to be an elective, but it was one of the best classes I've ever had. A speech class was one of the best ones, but also an elective. And I think a music appreciation, which I didn't know you could appreciate music that much, but yes, there's so many more levels to it and all different types of music. So do you view music or listen to music that way? Can you remember not listening to it that way and then listening to it as a musician and thinking, oh, that's an interesting thing, what they did to bridge those two, whatever, insert musical lingo is, this bridge between that and that, or this break between that, or a transition from something else. Do you listen to music differently now than you would have without knowing all of that?
Well, first, I would like to say you're absolutely right. I've had so many people tell me that they took a jazz appreciation course or a music appreciation course, and as an elective, and they were just so fascinated. It was such a great thing, and they're so glad they did that. They had no idea what a great idea it was until they just took the course and showed up. But everybody should do that. It's an incredible idea, and that's why it's not really a great idea. There's a lot of people who say, well, all these stupid things that people take and they can't make a living. Well, none of them are stupid. The only maybe stupid thing might be is that you didn't take something of which you could make a living. And probably the all-time stupidest thing is that you can't make a living in some of these great things, whether it's science or the arts or music. You should be able to make a living in those things. Our world would be a better place. But with regards to how to listen, that's another thing that, people should learn. When you listen to music, most people realize throughout their lives, you'll hear their tastes in music appreciating, oh, I didn't like this, but now I do. Well, that's because there was a learning curve. 9 times out of 10, there was a learning curve. You didn't have that. You weren't aware of the learning curve at first. So you were just trying to, if it wasn't just, the frosting on the cake type of music that was like pop, the sugar pop, you didn't like it as much because that's all you knew. But now you're growing through the learning curve as you grow as a person. And all of a sudden you're appreciating that music so much more. As far as listening from a musical standpoint, that's a catch-22 because you're studying music and you're developing the ability to hear things that the average person doesn't. And absolutely, I do. I'll hear something all the time. I can't. I left a computer on after a video. I was lying down. I didn't turn it off, and something else came on, and it was this movie Malcolm X, I think from 1992, which has a lot of jazz and stuff. And I was hearing, they were playing a section of a song. I'm like, oh, that's I Cover the Waterfront. Oh, I hear the way they're playing that. Oh, I hear the tempo. Oh, I hear the way it's phrased. I hear the harmony. You hear all these nuances, all these things. But the other problem with that is some people could get lose the natural way that people enjoy music. And so you don't want to cross over into a world where you can't enjoy music the way you did when you were a baby. So it's a fine line. You want to gain that, ability, because it's incredible. It's incredible to hear all these things and realize all these things. But at the same time, you can't throwing out your natural inclination and intuition and appreciation that you're just born with and you just have innately, would be like the baby with the bathwater. You don't want to get rid of it.
Yeah, I think of it as listening to music with soft ears. That is, I'm just listening to the song the way it's presented. I'm not trying to pull it apart and dissect it like would be done on like the Song Exploder podcast or TV show, where I can't pronounce his name correctly, but where he goes in and listens to the different layers of it, which I find very interesting and very worth listening to. But also, you want to just hear the song sometimes, and then you go, I wonder why I like this so much. And you look into it deeper, especially if you're trying to figure out how to play it yourself. Then
I actually go backwards, and I will take a layman or a person, because at Jazz Trapeze, maybe we have volunteers, and if I have a volunteer, I'll say, what do you think of that? Because I want to hear, I know they're not listening with all of this stuff, all of the stuff in my head. And I want to hear the perspective of someone that doesn't have, I want that all removed, and I can't remove it myself. So what I do is I will, get opinions from just the layman. I often will reach out to a layman's opinion, just someone that I'm working with or talking with, or just could be anybody, and just get their opinion, just because I want that perspective.
interesting to think about the layers of life.
Yeah, because
Well, then,
sometimes like I'll be talking to someone and I know this person knows hardly anything about he knows no because I know what he doesn't know. So I'll be like a cousin or something, you know. We're talking to and I know he doesn't know any technical music. He doesn't know where middle C is on a piano, and I know what he kind of listens to. So wow, I'm gonna get all that perspective. I'm gonna hear from him what almost anyone in his bag, you know, in his category. You know what I mean? So it's really valuable to me to hear the perspective of somebody that's not able to incorporate all of those other options.
why do you think, or what do you think causes people to have different interests in, well, more specifically in creative things? Like, why are some people more interested in building versus music versus writing versus philosophy, all those other things? What do you think causes that?
You know, I'm not really sure, but I think one thing that could happen is they're in a certain stage of their growth as a person and they become influenced by something at the moment, you know. So let's say someone, I don't know, in a certain time the cars were such a big thing. I maybe they still are, I don't know, but you know, there were times when like everything was about a car, you know. And so that kid gets into the under the hood of a car and the next thing you know, he's looking at a car the way a musician is looking at, you know what I mean? He's going deeper into that, you know. So that becomes the thing that he's, you know, knowledgeable and deep about. So part of it could be that. And then another part of it could just be, you know, the changing as things change. Sometimes people will adapt. But I do see people that are very advanced in a specific area. And it appears to me that it caught them at just the right time. It's almost like the people that still go to see the Rolling Stones, right? Or the Doobie Brothers just played a show. I just happened to see it online a few days ago, you know, and some of those guys, I mean, some of these bands that have to retire, the singer's like 76 years old. I think it's Steven Tyler from Aerosmith who can't sing anymore. But there were all these people willing to come to a show if he only could sing, but he can at this point. So you get that where they, you know, that's their moment, and then they don't really do much music. They don't. Their mind doesn't really expand musically from that point. They get into an age or a time in their life where, you know, whatever they get musically, that's kind of going to be the soul of where they go forward with music as far as a listener.
Yeah, there's a couple things with Aerosmith specifically. I think I saw a clip of him on, I don't watch The Voice or whatever music show he was a judge on,
Right.
but somebody was singing one time and then he says, well, try it like this. And he did the harmony. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay. He's a singer. Because it's just something that you're like, wow, that's pretty good to be able to just whip that out like that. And then watching some other, I think it was a guitar show, and it had Keith Richards on there, and he was explaining music theory. And I thought, oh, this is somebody who's serious about the craft here. It's not just what you see of the Rolling Stones, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll part. There's a lot more thinking going on under there with the musician side of it. It's always nice to hear somebody that's interested in what they're doing.
Absolutely. And see, that's another example. Those Rolling Stones guys were very deep into a specific sound that came out of, I believe, Mississippi or Memphis, but it was a kind of a blues town. And they adapted those songs. And when they did them in a rock and roll version, they really took off. But a lot of them come from, you know, like kind of a Muddy Waters era, not specifically Muddy Waters, but those kinds of people. That's really where their influence comes from. And they fell in love with that as kids, and they thought they were the coolest people on their block. Almost like when you collect baseball cards, they were collecting unknown blues masters, you know what I mean? And just getting into the little minutia of what they do. And, I mean, I think there were actually some issues between Chuck Berry and that guitar player that you're mentioning, the Rolling Stones guy,
Yeah,
where they, it got a little weird because he idolized Chuck Berry, but at the same time, he was way more famous, and it was there was some, they had an interesting relation because they got to know each other at one point. I don't know all the dynamics, but, Steven Tyler was actually a drummer, I believe, before he was a singer. And I heard he was a real pain in the ass for the drummer in that band because he would, at one point he was a real pain in the ass because I think his father was Steven Tyler's father was a drummer or something. So he became a drummer, that kind of thing. And, so they had, you have these abilities and you have this knowledge.
Yeah, I imagine it would be difficult being in a band with somebody that was good at so many different instruments and maybe better at the instrument you were playing. It would be tough, but also the opportunity to learn would be good. I think of like Dave Grohl, and his drummers going through where you're like, oh, that's tough. It's tough to be a drummer in a band that the guy's known for drumming.
Yeah, someone mentioned that to me recently. Oddly enough, someone had mentioned that it was a woman who was a drummer, like an amateur drummer. She owns a restaurant, but she loved the drumming. I said, "Who are your favorite drummers?" And she said, "Dave Grohl, but he doesn't play drums anymore. But he's one of my favorite drummers, because now that guy is just such a good musician in general. He's singing and playing guitar. So, yeah, if you're in a drummer in his band, he's going to hear every single, he's going to know. Yeah. I mean, he's going to be hearing it again, like you said, with that different set of ears.
Yeah. So then, jazzforpeace.org, what's your goal with that and the future of it?
Our goal at this point, and this is after 23 years of thinking about it, because like I said, it started as a poem on 9/11. I'll throw it into my musical thing so you'll get to hear it. And, went on to a benefit concert series that's helped over 850 of the world's most outstanding causes. Again, I was thinking creatively with, what to do with that poem. I had to get creative. And, it's brought music into schools and instrument donation program. After all of this knowledge, I feel that, and at the time I felt it was important to unite Israelis, Palestinians, and Americans. That was in 2002. Of course, nobody really listens to us little musicians, but if they were going to listen to me now, and I hope they don't wait 23 years to listen to this, it would be to take the world from 0 to 1. That's simple. So basically, if you look at funding in this world and you look at these funding allotments, you'll see that war is funded, or military, or the military industrial complex, even on September 10th, by the way. If you look this up, you might already know this, but if you don't, look it up. This guy Rumsfeld came out on the day before 9/11 and made an announcement that 2.1 trillion, not million and not billion, trillion, $2.1 trillion was unaccounted for in the military budget on the 10th. And then 9/11 came and people forgot they had so many things to worry about that they could, like, what happened to that 2.1 trillion? But that's all the way back then. So, and you hear the announcements of in the billions being just this day, that day. So war you see being funded at 100%. In comparison, you see peace being funded. In comparison, it would be zero. It would be like 0.000. Maybe there's a 1 there somewhere, but it's 0% funding. So you got 100 and you've got 0 for peace. And then you've got the achievements of Jazz for Peace and others, I'm sure. But if you look at our achievements, and that would be, I would say you could go to a site that's not even our website, but it's our archive site. That's jazzforpeace.wordpress.com/about. And that's a site where you can go to and read about the concert we did in Jacksonville if you wanted to. I mean, because we received so many testimonials from the actual outstanding causes we were helping all over the world, and they're all listed there. And, so if you see what Jazz for Peace did with 0, okay, and now you see how much it costs for their funding. And what if you were to go from 0 with the achievements just at 0 to 1? I think you would change the world in unbelievably dramatic, amazing, profoundly positive ways. So that is my suggestion right now. And maybe someone will give it a little more thought than they did when I brought Israelis and Palestinians and Americans together in 2002, because now they're looking at me like, well, geez, you were right about that. What else? What else do you think you might be right about? So I think we should go from 0 to 1. 0% funding for world peace to 1% funding for world peace. Unfortunately, that means we have to bring funding for war maybe down from 100 to 99.
Hmm.
What do you think of that idea?
I have to cogitate on it. I mean, peace
Yeah.
is nice. I'm good with peace. I wonder how much funding a military is arguably funding peace.
Well, I'll tell you, when a lot of times when I travel, they bring me to the military. The military wants to talk to me. When I went to Nigeria, like, for example, my last thing of Africa, you can look online and you'll see that I was on something called Armed Forces Radio Nigeria. And they brought me through the checkpoints and right into the military, because the military, when I talk to them a lot, they're like, hey, if you could, we're here for defense, but we don't want, if you could stop us having to kill somebody in the first place, that would be a godsend. If you could stop the actual thing from happening. And that's what funding for peace would do, because Jazz for Peace is redefining peace. We've taken all of the great people that came before us, from Gandhi to, John Coltrane, to all these great people, John Lennon, even, who've contributed. And now we're saying, look, we can, if we use world-class cultural events to help the world's greatest causes, we can not only help solve the problems of today, of which those mission statements are dedicated to solving. Again, they have to be really the greatest causes that really are putting that first, solving their mission statement. We're not only doing that, solving the problems of today, but we're stopping problems of tomorrow that will come if you don't solve the problems of today. So that's what we think is the way forward.
So if you were going to go from a theoretical 0 to 1% funding peace, what is that money going towards, like, specifically?
Well, I'll tell you, a lot of it's going to go towards outstanding causes that really care about, again, people that are really dedicated to those causes. So, there's a lot of causes out there, and for a lot of people, it's a dog and pony show where they get a tax break. They do it for this, they do it for that, they do it for, their image or whatever. And I'm not talking about those. Jazz for Peace separates the wheat from the chaff. That's what we do. And we try to, and our funding model kind of separates them. And so people who are not really who they say they are, they don't want the spotlight that we project on them. Whereas people who are who they really say they are do want the spotlight. They do want to be more publicized. They do want to be more prestigious. They do want to be more sponsored, et cetera, and of course, better funded. And that's what our empowerment tree does. And so if you took all of the greatest causes in the world and you made them much, much stronger, you funded them through our benefit concert series. That's just one of many ways, but helping those who are helping others, okay? All that money counts towards the 1%, going from 0 to 1.
What do you think specifically three great causes in the world are for peace?
Wow, there are so many, but Jazz for Peace alone has 3 great causes. I mean, we have Jazz for Peace has a way to address the Mideast conflict, and the way that we have is so popular amongst both Israelis and Palestinians that it was voted 96% favorability by Israeli people, and even higher from Palestinian people and the rest of the world. And there's actually a link where people were able to go and look at that before they voted. Of course, a lot of people don't vote because they're afraid. People are afraid, if my employer, who's a warmonger, finds out, what will happen? But nevertheless, It's called jazzforpeace.org/conflict resolution Q&A. So conflict resolution Q, then the and word, that and then a.pdf. And it has all the question and answers. People could look at it. And like I said, the favorability is massive amongst both the people that are supposed to be in the war. So the Palestinians and Israelis, they want this, they've chosen this solution 96%. So, you know, that would be a great cause right there. Another great cause, which Jazz for Peace has come across that we think would be great, would be a way to basically, right now you have technology eliminating jobs. So there are a lot of people who like, oh my God, if technology gets any better, I'm going to lose my job. Well, Jazz for Peace has a way around that. And that is, you can take funds that are generated from that technology that you no longer have to pay an employee, right? And you could take that money and you could help these people that are being displaced. You could actually give them a chance with the money you're earning anyway to do something 1,000 times more productive for society than they would have been doing on that job. And that would be chasing after their goals and dreams as human beings, because they're all unique. You'll find someone who loves, taking care of wildlife. That's a passion. Another person might be doing it for a job, but this person's passionate about it. They're going to get much more done. And now you're taking the money that's already being created anyway by the technology. And now that person can contact Jazz for Peace and say, hey, I have an outstanding cause. I'm doing that. And we can, our other organizations that can assist them and let all these people help solve these problems that our governments are unable to solve, that are, cities and towns. I mean, they might be trying, but as you can see, they're not solving them. Why? Because we need everybody. We need more people involved. So that's another opportunity. Here's one more that I can tell you that Jazz for Peace has come across. Right now, we have a trickle-down economy. You've heard that word, right? Trickle down?
I've heard it.
Yes, everybody's heard it. I've never met anyone who said they never heard this word trickle down. I hear this word. I don't see it, but I hear it. Trickle down, trickle down, trickle down. Well, it's probably something that's functioning. It's fine with me. I don't have any problem. I don't want to remove it. Keep it there. But it doesn't work for philanthropy. Do you know why? Because I work with outstanding causes. And do you know what I see? And when you talk to one over there and you'll see it. Share this video, by the way, with them, and you'll see, they'll tell you what I'm talking about. They spend 90% of their time trying to get their funding. And then they've got only a few days left to do what it is that they really want to do and achieve their goal, right? So because it's not trickling down to them, these people that have great ideas and are doing good, they're getting the money last, okay? What I'd like to do is for philanthropy only, specifically for a trickle-up economy. So a trickle-up economy for philanthropy. This can run concurrent with our trickle-down economy, but it runs concurrent. And this way, through, let's say, a cryptocurrency, Jazz for Peace even has one called Trickle. And with the blockchain, you can make rules. So the money doesn't get released unless it fits these guidelines. You know what I mean? Unless it's real. You can't just, grab a bunch of money and run to the nearest Irish bar. You know what I mean? With your dartboard. No. It's got to, the funds get released for that purpose. As this organization that has completed these steps, as they spend that money into the economy, the funds trickle up. It's that simple.
I have to think about those a little more. I don't know. The trickle down, from what I understand, is you have people that own businesses and their businesses make money. And they then give people jobs and they make a product, whether it's cars or houses or whatever it is. And then that's how it trickles down. So the people at the top will make more money because they're making, just for instance, they're making 1% on everything that is made in their factory. Let's just say it's cars. So then you have the workers that are making money making the cars, and then the cars have to get sold. So
Well, hold on
people
one
have
second.
funds.
I think you're leaving out all the funds that are created out of thin air by the Federal Reserve. The money that's printed.
I do believe that we kind of went wrong when we got off the gold standard, but the gold standard is also would have its problems if people figured out how to make gold out of lead for a lot less money than they can do it now. I think I read an article some years ago about how they did it, but it took so much energy to do it that it wasn't practical.
That's
But
correct. But I think you remember in 2008 when we had the financial problem and those guys got in front of the Federal Reserve and they said, we need 865 billion or this whole thing is going to, we need it tomorrow or this whole thing's going to fall. And the Fed basically just printed it and gave it to them. Do you remember that?
yeah,
That was the start. I mean, if you continue to look up, you'll see that trillions and trillions of dollars have been printed out of thin air. Don't forget this money that's not accounted for, the 2.1 trillion that wasn't accounted for that Rumsfeld mentioned on the 10th of September, all the way back then. Where did that money come from? That didn't come from somebody manufacturing a car.
yeah, we have a fiat currency for sure.
So the fiat currency, so that's what I think you should look into. The fact that everything that's being done with the fiat currency, what you mentioned, but plus everything else, it's all under a trickle down umbrella. Okay. And what I'm suggesting is a trickle up economy for philanthropy, because we have this trickle down for everything else. But for philanthropy, we can do a trickle up model to balance it out.
What would be a thing that you would fund with a trickle up economy to make peace?
Well, I'll tell you, there is a website that's for entrepreneurs. It's called enterprisezone.cc. I don't even know if you're able to go online where you are, but if you were, you could type it in if you wanted to. It's called enterprisezone.cc. And you would go to that site and you would type in the entrepreneur's name. In this case, you would type in Rick DellaRatta, and you'll see an article in 100 words that says, what kind of outstanding cause would we want to put our resources, our 100% of our backing. And you can actually see that right on the page. Okay. And you can click on that. And then when you click on that, it'll take you to other 100-word questions that are phenomenal that I answer that, and you'll see that are pertinent. But you know what my answer is? Ones that follow simple guidelines. That's my answer. Because an organization that's not going to follow simple guidelines, no matter how well-meaning they are, okay, what are they going to do with that funding? They're probably going to botch up. You know what I mean? If they can't follow simple guidelines, then what confidence do I have that they're not going to make the same mistake if they get the money or they get the funding?
Yeah, everything's corruptible.
There you go.
Especially when you figure humans in. But what are 3 things that would make or would be worth pursuing in the name of peace? Like, what do you think would bring peace about? 3 simple things.
Well, when I say outstanding causes, I didn't know there were so many. So any problem that you know of in the world, there are maybe even hundreds of people that are related to outstanding causes that want to solve that problem. There's a guy right now who's contacting us. And so I wouldn't be able to choose 3 because I would be discriminating against probably 1,000 others or tens of thousands of others. But I could just tell you people right in my periphery. There's a person right now who has a party called the Solutions Party. And basically, he wants to give people more options for political parties because right now, right now, there is no way for an Abraham Lincoln to have a voice in this country. Do you know why?
I don't know why.
I'm going to tell you. Abraham Lincoln was a third-party candidate. And right now, not only do we only have two parties, but one of those parties does not even have a process anymore. You know, where they have the debates and they have, you know, they have a whole bunch of people. The Democratic Party doesn't even have that anymore. They don't even have that. They just appoint somebody. So we don't even have what we're supposed to have. And that's partially because that process got corrupted because it got overtaken by the people who were running it, which was a woman's organization that was running it perfectly, fairly, and all that stuff. But this is what happens in an ism as it gets corrupted. You mentioned corruptible. These things get corruptible, and the next thing you know, it's something is kind of co-opted or, you know, controlled or bought out. And this is something that happened, by the way, I've been talking about it lately with cars. You know, we were talking about cars earlier, about how someone, you know, becomes passionate about cars. But at the same time, if you look at how all of these roads ended up all over our world, and we don't know the ramifications of the sun going directly into concrete, those roads all got there by a company called, you know, had some kind of a name like Acme Transport. It was a dummy company that was formed by Chrysler, by Ford, and by all the major car companies. And they colluded. They put this company together, a shell company, and that company went and bought the private transportation system of the city of Los Angeles with all of those, you know, those trolley cars that were electric, cleanest energy in the world. They bought it. And they bought it so that they could dismantle it, because nobody was going to need a car if they didn't do that.
I think those trolleys probably ran on coal.
Well, look it up. My understanding was they were phenomenally eco-friendly. And I'll bet you, okay, if they could have or did have, they certainly could run on electricity today. Isn't that correct?
Could cars or trolleys?
Trolleys.
Yeah, certainly.
Certainly. So I would look up if they ever were not really good, really eco-friendly. I'm not aware that they ever were. I mean, my understanding is it was a wonderful thing across the board, but especially for people who wanted to get somewhere in the city of Los Angeles, which is a wide open city. So to have a, you know, a public transportation system like that was a phenomenal gift. It was actually so good that nobody was buying cars.
I mean, I think a lot of things that are electric run on coal and natural gas and other fossil fuels. I'm not sure fossil fuels are really the great Satan that everybody or a lot of people say they are. And maybe if people were really concerned with the environment, the new nuclear would be the way to go as far as whatever the cleanest, most efficient energy is that we have available to us right now. There might be something else along in the future.
Well, what you're talking
maybe
about,
hydrogen or something.
yeah, I think
Go
what
ahead.
you're talking about, Michael Moore did a movie on the fallacy of green energy, and he caught some of these guys, basically, you know, touting all of this stuff, and it turns out to be nonsense. Of course, again, that's corruption, which you brought out. But what I think you should look into with my point is, look at how much less of whatever it is, even if it was pure coal, how much spectacularly less it is to have a bunch of trolleys going around perfectly on time, taking people in the city of Los Angeles. I mean, I would look into that, because I can't tell you that it was not perfectly eco-friendly, you know, clean as you can get. But let's just say it was dirty. If it was, look at how small that is compared to a world now that has been covered by cement. I mean, I travel around the world and it is covered with cement that the sun is going directly into instead of the ground. I don't know what those ramifications are, but I would trade dirt any day of the week as from an echo from an environmentally concern than I would concrete. And not only that, all of the cars. How many zillions of cars are on these roads? I mean, it's spectacular.
Yeah, I think for America, the car and the firearm are two things that symbolize a certain individual freedom. So it's going to be hard to get that from people. And I don't know if you really need to. I mean, if you make a public transportation system that works, then people will use it. If you don't, then people won't use it, and you'll have to use subsidies to support it, and you'll have to go after people's cars so you make them ride it. So I'm not sure what the answer is on that.
Well, I'm not
The
saying there's an answer because you'd have to go backwards. But what I'm saying is it already did work. It already was working. And apparently it got dismantled.
I mean,
City to city to city.
if I had the choice between riding a bus or riding in my own car, I'm going to ride in my own car
Me too.
almost every time.
Me too.
I mean, there could be a time where I would say, okay, I'll take the bus.
Me
But
too.
I mean, I've taken the bus before. I've learned bus routes and out in California, Camp Pendleton area and all that. And you waste so much more time sitting on the bus riding around when you could get to somewhere within minutes versus 45 minutes, 5 minutes. But that's just the marine view of trying to get out of 19 area over to Oceanside.
Right, but
And then I learned about the
you're
express
also
bus.
yeah, and I'm the same way. I 100% agree with you, but we're both talking about a broken transportation system, not an effective one. We don't even know. We've never lived in the public transportation system that existed in Los Angeles at that time. It was on clockwork, and they came every 6 minutes. So we don't know what a good public transportation even is. So of course, based on our knowledge of broken transportation systems, I agree with you 100%. But that's a broken transportation system, not a proper one.
That sounds like the general argument for communism, which is communism is great. It's just never been tried the way it should have been tried.
Well, it's not because we did try it and it did work. See, the public transport system was tried and did work. So
I think if it worked that great, it would still be around. It wouldn't have been able to be torn apart by automakers.
No. It was taken down for profit. You
I
have
have
to
to look
realize
into it more, but I mean,
look
I
into it
like
more.
having a car.
Listen, you love having a car, and so do I. But I'm just telling you the facts, and I would love to be debunked because I don't want to even believe it myself. It's kind of ugly, but we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And do you really expect these executives to sit and stare at that money and not do anything because they're so just? I mean, you just said people are corruptible. You and I might do the same thing. We are corruptible as human beings. So if you stare at $500 million long enough on a table, you're going to just at some point or other, you're going to say, screw it. Let's take this over. Let's do this. We know it's going to work. And it did work. Not only worked, but it worked all over the world. They did it all over the world. But it's not just that. Let's look at cancer research. There's a thing on YouTube right now called Soft White Underbelly. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's a YouTube channel where the guy was interviewing homeless people. For some reason or other, he's branching out, which is a great thing. He interviewed a guy 4 or 5 days ago. 4 or 5 days ago, he interviewed this guy who had insider information as to what was going on in cancer research. He worked in it, and he basically said that there were cancer products that would come out, and they can't help your cancer at all. They might hurt you, but they can't help you. But they were going to make a lot of money if you could get them approved anyway. You see what I mean? If you could do it anyway. And they corrupted the system, and they got the products, even named them. The product can't help you at all. You're going to get nowhere, but it helps the people to the hundreds of millions of dollars. They got people who were credible, and they offered them so much money that they said, yeah, I'll tout this. And they went on and touted it, and they got $250 million payouts. to tout a product that does absolutely nothing. So these are just facts related to your point about that we humans are corruptible.
Yeah, you get no argument from me that people are corruptible, and most people are corrupt.
I'm only pointing to those examples of, what I'm telling you is that it could happen to any human. I mean, put any of us in the same temptation. It's extraordinary temptation. But listen, this is where I think a philanthropic trickle up currency would make a difference, could make a difference in those areas.
I think if it works well, then okay, but it's probably needs to be somewhat corruption proof. So here's my 3 ideas, just thinking about it now,
Okay.
for what needs the first 3 things for world peace. First 3 things you need to work on. And it's not like saying you need to go over here and look at this thing and read these things. It's here's 3 ideas.
Great.
Morality. You need to have morality.
Great.
And then you need to have security. And then irrigation. So those are the 3 fields that I would, if I was approaching trying to get world peace. So morality, you're going to be able to get people to see or agree on what's good and what's bad, because that's different for different people. So you have to find some way for people to get along. And then security, you have to have some way to know that the barbarians at the gate aren't going to come in and ravage your civilization.
True.
When you're trying to get along with this world peace thing.
Right.
And then irrigation, just because, we all need water and it would be nice to grow things and be able to have a drink. So those are my top 3
I think
things.
let's say you've identified the 3 things. I think there might be more, but I think you've identified 3. You've done it.
Yeah.
You've identified 3. How do you get there? And that's where Jazz for Peace comes in. We believe that one of the things that's going to be necessary is to raise the frequency of all of us. Raise our frequency to our higher potential. Raise at a high level of frequency. Again, going back to my famous quote, you're giving yourself a better chance. You want to give yourself, my famous quote was, we will have a better chance at avoiding the behavior that leads to destruction. You want to do that with regards to these 3 opportunities. And by doing, one of the ways to doing that is to raise your frequency.
It sounds good, but then it comes down to what are the instructions for raising your frequency? How do you get people to do that?
Well,
and what does it really mean?
Well, go to my famous quote. If you do that, if you wake up tomorrow and you look at my famous quote and you say, gosh darn it, today, this day, I'm going to embrace artistry, intellectuality, creativity, humanity, and I can give you a handful more. Watch, you'll end up, your frequency will be raised. Okay. Now, I put sports in that, skiing and swimming, that raises your, your endorphins, things like that. But again, these are all things that raise your frequency. And I think, again, we can help people by giving them opportunities to raise their frequency. For example, like I said, giving that person where he doesn't have to go to flip the burger because the machine is doing it, but he also isn't homeless either because the machine didn't make him homeless, because we took some of that money and gave him an opportunity to go after his passion. The opportunity for him to pursue his passion would raise as part of raising his frequency.
I guess I'm looking for something that you can hold and be able to say, this is what we need to do. Because I feel like raising your frequency is like saying, from the more Eastern mind of, you want to be enlightened. You want to understand things more. Or maybe from the Western pop culture of, you want to be woke, which seems like that's probably turned into something that it was either meant to be or wasn't meant to be. And it's kind of polluted the idea of understanding what's going on around you. The problem there is, once you achieve some sort of certain enlightenment, some certain understanding, a morality, I would argue, once you have that, what do you do with the people that won't buy into that?
Well, that's when you come back to the military industrial complex. You're going to have that. So I think people, humans, are corruptible, corrupt, and they will always go to war. So what do you think then, backing up from that, agreeing with it or not, backing up from that and thinking, what is the purpose of our time here as an individual or as a group? What's the meaning of life? Why are we here?
I think we're here because each one of us has something innate within us and possibly even unique within us to contribute in a positive way. I mean, all of the things you're saying are true, except look at the shift in circumstance when you change little teeny mini minuscule things. I'll give you an example. There's a famous story. We put these two mice in a like a cement area, and we put some cocaine down, and we put water down, and the mice just did the cocaine until they died. And that's a very famous one. But guess what? They also took the same mice and they put them out in the field, and they showed them all the things that they love in life, all the things that they embrace. And they put a bunch of cocaine down, and the mice had no interest. So that shift of giving them, of taking that which is vital away from them, okay, changes their mindset in a destructive way. Whereas taking them and putting them that which is, which is embraced and loved by their species, changes their mindset in a positive way. Look at World War II. Okay, now we know that the German people got themselves in a crazy situation where they were dependent on the decisions of one person. Everything was all this guy Hitler. He's going to either make us or break us. Well, they put themselves, it's a risky situation to be in first place, where one guy, you're depending on one guy to get you out. And then we find out this one guy is dependent on a quacky doctor who was shooting him up with methamphetamine and cocaine and every single drug, cocktails of wacky, wild drugs. And he was out of his mind. And so, look at how that went when you put all these, things together. So my point is, within the framework of what you're saying, which are the hard facts that are undeniable, there are variables which can be altered tremendously in a positive way by embracing the opportunity to do so, whatever opportunities are there to do so. And one of those opportunities is to allow a person the opportunity to figure out what his passion in life is. And if that looks like it could benefit our society, give him an opportunity to follow that passion instead of have to run to a job he doesn't like, run home, cook breakfast, do this, do that, and then so tired with 1 hour left with no funding, he just falls asleep. While the head of the company, okay, gets, I don't know, $80 billion, okay, and pays no taxes.
I think the grander view of trickle down, trickle up economics, the one that you can ask the question of both, is where does the money come from? And I think it's going to be from the same place, no matter the answer. The money's coming from the same place, and that's just, it's made up. It's a made up construct, but to a human, it actually means something. As far as the reason for being here being to contribute and to have the opportunity, I like that. I'll have to think more about it. Those are two good words. I think perhaps our reason for being here in this reality is to experience it and to have a perspective, that each one of us will have a different perspective of what life is. Even if we live the same thing right by each other, we would still have some sort of different view of what it means and how it feels to us. And that maybe that's what we're here to understand, is the emotion of it. This is outside of the idea that we're just a farm for aliens and they're going to collect our souls when we die.
that's a little more scary. But as far as the idea that we're here to experience would explain to me why good and bad happens, because eh, if there's a God and a creator and there's a reason for this that maybe our human minds can't understand. To put it most simply, maybe it is just to feel it, to have the perspective, because if you were an all-powerful, all-knowing being, you might not know what it feels like to be powerless. Maybe you would, if you're all powerful, understand powerlessness, but I don't know. I think that there's so much pain and there's so much good in the world that you have to experience it to understand it. But the idea of you're here to contribute and to have the opportunity, I think those are closely linked with the other. I'll have to think about it more. And
What do you think about what the what you alluded to about this? Because isn't it David Icke, or there's a few pretty smart people who talk about aliens, and what you said about that we're being I don't know, our energy's being collected by aliens. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's above my pay grade, but I just was wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
I mean, it's a scary thing to think that we're here as like a farm and we are the cattle that are being grown for whatever reason that we don't understand. That's scary. And then maybe another is that we're here and put through torments in order to harness whatever that feeling is that we give off, whatever that energy is we can't see, that something else is living off of it. I don't know.
Right.
When we
But I
look,
mean, is there any proof of that? It's an interesting concept, and the people who say it are not stupid. But is there any proof of it, or is there anything concrete that leads us to believe it's a possibility?
there's nothing that I've seen that I would say that's definitely it. And
Right.
if you did have that, I'm not sure you would share that with people if you knew it for sure,
Okay.
because what would that do to society? You know, I
Yeah.
mean,
I mean,
a lot
it's
of people
interesting.
think it's terrible here, but maybe it's better here than it is in the next spot.
Yeah. I mean, again, like I like to keep my eyes. I like to keep my now. I like to keep things open, but if I don't have much concrete, I can't do a whole lot with something. Like I can't do a whole lot with a UFO that someone hasn't actually like captured or seen. So you can only go so far. But I mean, it's on it's not off the table. It's just not something I can completely say for sure is happening or anything like that.
I think it's as ethereal as raise your vibration, and you
Well,
could go
I don't
down
know.
whichever one.
Well, raising your frequency is very concrete. I mean, what is something you do that you like a lot?
Swimming and running, I like that.
Okay, so after you swim, don't you feel a certain sort of don't you feel something after that? And that running, you catch a buzz from that, don't you? After you get a certain amount of miles? I don't know,
Yeah,
like
there's a
running.
reason you keep doing it. Yeah.
Okay, but that's your frequency is that's very tangible. I mean, you are raising your frequency. It's not permanent, but that raises your frequency. That's why I sometimes purposely try to swim in the morning, because I learned from skiing that I could raise my frequency and start the day almost like a golfer with a handicap. You know what I mean? It's like I'm 2 shots ahead.
Hmm.
So that's way more tangible than, this thought of us being farmed by aliens, because, I've never seen an alien. I've never, you know what I mean? I don't have anything tangible, but I have swam and I have skied and I have noticed that my frequency is raised, and I've noticed it enough to actually do it habitually, just to give myself, like I said, that 2-shot lead going into the rest of my day.
Have you ever felt like you were a conduit for some sort of creative force?
First, every time I play a note of music, it's
There's the alien.
That's why I'm saying it's not off the table. I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
off the table at all. Like I said, I'm opening myself up to a power that's greater than me. I mean, all I have to do is look up at the sky and I see something greater than me. I mean, we're nothing compared to this creation. When you go scuba diving, if you lucky enough to scuba dive to a coral reef or something. I mean, it's just insane. So I realize, how small, how little we are in the grand scape of things. I just can't, go factually into things that I don't have, but I do believe in the overall essence of, yes, I mean, this it's way bigger than us. Whatever it is, it's a lot bigger than we are.
Yeah, I hope there's more to life and existence than just here. If it isn't, this is pretty great, but it could also be pretty bad. And if there is more, I hope there is more. It's not like a thing where I say this is it and you die here and then it's just a long dreamless sleep. I mean, that's a nice way to say there's nothing, but I hope there's something else. I feel like there's something else. And I can't remember the theory of that back then where it talks about if you believe in God, is it better to believe and there is no God than it is to not believe and there is no God? I mean, I think it's called Pascal's wager, maybe. But that's the whole idea is if you were living your life like there's something more, then maybe you're going to be a better person here while you're living. Otherwise, it just turns into Mad Max,
Well, I think it's just common sense that, there is so much that we know so little about. I mean, take a turtle. I once had an opening act. I was telling somebody the other day, and the opening act was called Tortuga.com. And they said the guy's going to come out and talk. He's not going to play music. And I had just saved over 1 million sea turtles in Mexico, oh my God, what's the name of that place? But anyway, it's a place in Mexico. It's about an hour and a half, Akumal, Mexico, about an hour and a half from Cancun. And it's a place where the turtles come up and they lay their eggs. And the reason they do is because there's a coral reef, one of the closest coral reefs you could ever imagine. And the best chance those turtles have to get to safety would be that coral reef. So I was there to do that because they wanted to put, hotels in there. And I was helping the people with a Jazz for Peace event that is repeated every year there now to ward that off to save these turtles. And I end up after that. Now, again, all these little 6 degrees of separation, come on, there's got to be something to it. So I do that. On my way to there, I didn't even know I was saving turtles, was a 2-year-old that I was in the back seat with, talking about all of his little toys and all these little things. And he was saying a tortuga. And I was like, I didn't know what the tortuga was and what everything else was. And I said, what is this thing he's saying? What's the word? I said, tortuga. Oh, he has a pet turtle. He's telling you all about his pet turtle. The pet turtle's not there. It's at home. Then I'm saving turtles. Then right after that, I'm in Chicago with Tortuga.com. And this guy goes on and talks about how our frequency, our energy is possibly screwed up because of beliefs we have. One, that there's 12 months of the year. He said turtles have 13 of these squares and there are 13 months of the year, not 12. And it's 28 days each. And he had all other kinds of facts and figures that he was saying that we are kind of, off on. And so the point is, there's so much above and beyond us that you don't need to see an alien to know that, if it exists or doesn't exist, it wouldn't matter. There's a connection and there's things that cannot be explained. We just can't tangibly explain them.
What's the best way for people to follow your work and see what you're working on?
One kind of cool way would be that way that I told you to go to enterprisezone.cc and just type my name in and see these little 100-word things, because that will get you a lot of information within just minutes, about Jazz for Peace and kind of help you find out what we're all about. But right now there are new things coming out every day. There's a video that just came out the other day. And so you would go to YouTube and type in how to get funds from Jazz for Peace. You just type that in and a video comes up. So, there's a lot of stuff. But as far as just the basics, our website is jazzforpeace.org. And then if you just want to find out about me, rickdellaratta.com.
Okay. I have those links that'll be in the show notes also, so people can go to there and see what's going on. I think I also have some radio ones, some Facebook ones, a YouTube one,
Great.
a couple other different things for you.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you very much for your time. You mentioned that you were going to play a little jazz us out here.
I'm going to try to do something unique for your show that will never be played anywhere else at any time. If someone wants to hear it, they have to come to HumpDayCalls and listen to this exact performance. What I'm going to do, I'm going to play a little bit of that melody I told you, because we were talking about, did I ever like write something down? Did I ever not write something down or whatever? And this is a melody. I just came up with it all. And I was like, oh my God, I got to get down. I have to leave. But I just came up with it. I just wrote it, scribbled it on, and if I hadn't, I would have forgotten it. So we'll start out with that. It's called Falling Away. That's going to lead into the Jazz for Peace poem that you've been alluding to. So I'll give listeners a chance to hear that. And I'm going to freely improvise under that. So I don't know what's going to happen. If it's could be a train wreck, it could be disaster, it could be great. I don't know, because I'm going to completely improvise. Again, I'm going to hopefully depend on something far greater than me for whatever notes come out of the piano. But that's a poem, and we had talked about poetry a lot. And it's my one-hit wonder as a poet. And then we're going to end with a song called Peace. And this is a song that was written by a jazz great named Horace Silver. And again, it's hopefully an appropriate way to end this discussion.
Sounds good.
I hear jazz for peace. Coming through the trees. In my heart, it fills me like a celebration. I see the light. I want to follow. Inspired by the past contributions of those that came before. And laid the groundwork for us to build on in this universal language. That is a gift for all mankind. And when we speak it, people are inspired by the creativity and artistry that stands for peace and love and humanity that leads to reaching potential that we have in our soul. So we can raise our total conscience and see that the gift of giving is our greatest privilege. I hear jazz for peace. There's a place that I know where the sycamores grow, and daffodils have their fun, where the cares of the day seem to slowly fade away in the glow of the evening sun. Peace when the day is done. If I go there real late, let my mind meditate on everything to be done. If I search deep inside, let my conscience be my guide, then the answers are sure to come. Don't have to worry none. Peace is for